I saw my husband kiss another woman at my own book launch. Not a secret kiss. Not a mistake in a dark corner. It happened under white lights, in front of a glass wall, while people clapped for him, as if he were the reason I was standing there at all. If you've ever had a moment where the life you built collapses in silence, while everyone else keeps smiling, stay with me. Like this story. Leave a comment if you've ever been underestimated. And subscribe if you want to hear how words became the sharpest weapon I had. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I was 32 that night. And until then, I was known only as my husband's wife. The event was held at a small independent bookstore in Brooklyn on Atlantic Avenue. It wasn't glamorous. Folding chairs, cheap wine, a handwritten sign with my name spelled slightly wrong. But it mattered to me because it was the first time my work had been printed, bound, and placed on a shelf. The book wasn't a bestseller. It wasn't even reviewed yet. It was a modest literary essay collection published by a micro press called Harborline Editions. 5,000 copies. No advance, no guarantees. But it was mine. My husband, Daniel Brooks, arrived late. He always did. Daniel was 36, a senior marketing manager at a tech consulting firm, and he treated time the way he treated most things in our marriage, as something I adjusted around him. He walked in wearing a tailored navy coat, smiling too broadly, already scanning the room for people who mattered more than I did. "Oh good, you started," he said, kissing my cheek without looking at me. Behind him was a woman I didn't recognize. She was tall, blonde, confident in a way that suggested she'd never had to explain why she took up space. She wore a camel coat that probably cost more than the entire print run of my book. "Eleanor, this is Vanessa Carter," Daniel said quickly. "She works with me." Vanessa Carter smiled at me with an expression that wasn't hostile. It was dismissive, like I was part of the background. "So you're the writer," she said. "That's cute." Daniel laughed. "She's been working on this forever," he added. "It's kind of her hobby." A hobby. I didn't correct him. That was the pattern. We had been married for 7 years. I met Daniel in graduate school in Chicago, where I was finishing an MFA in creative writing, and he was getting an MBA, he liked to mention whenever someone asked what he did. At first, he said he admired my ambition. Then he started calling it impractical. Then he started treating it like something that existed only when it didn't inconvenience him. I paid half the rent. I handled the house. I edited his emails when he wanted to sound smart. I wrote in the early mornings and late nights when the rest of the world was quiet enough not to interrupt me. His parents never liked me. His mother, Patricia Brooks, had a way of smiling that felt like evaluation. His father, Leonard Brooks, spoke to me politely but never directly. At family dinners, conversations flowed around me like I wasn't seated at the table. "She's very creative," Patricia once said, as if explaining a deficiency. "Daniel needs someone grounded." I was the one with the spreadsheets. Daniel's younger sister, Megan Brooks, was openly dismissive. She worked in corporate law and liked to remind me that real careers have structure. At Christmas, my gifts were practical. A planner, a mug, a gift card. Daniel got praise. I noticed everything. I said nothing. The launch event moved on. People asked me about themes, about inspiration, about the essays I'd written while working part-time at a nonprofit communications office, earning $54,000 a year and pretending I was fine with that. Daniel drifted away from me as the night went on. At one point, I stepped outside for air. Through the glass, I saw them. Daniel and Vanessa Carter. She was standing too close. He was leaning in. Her hand rested on his arm like it belonged there. Then, she kissed him. Not hurried. Not hidden. He didn't pull away. I didn't move. I watched him smile afterward. I watched him say something that made her laugh. I watched the way his body angled toward her, protective and familiar. That was the moment something in me went very still. When I went back inside, Daniel noticed me watching. His face didn't change. That told me everything. Later, when the crowd thinned, I stood beside him as people congratulated us. Us. "You must be so proud," someone said to Daniel. "Of course," he replied easily. She couldn't have done it without my support. I looked at him. He didn't look back. On the subway ride home, we sat side by side. His phone buzzed. He didn't hide it. "Vanessa, tonight was fun. We should stop pretending. I didn't ask who she was. I didn't accuse. When we got home, he took off his coat and said, "We should talk." I nodded. "I've been unhappy," Daniel said. "And before you overreact, I think you need to understand that this isn't about cheating. It's about growth." I waited. "You live in your head," he continued. "You don't adapt. Vanessa understands the world I'm in now, and I don't," I said. He shrugged. "You chose your path." That was the second betrayal. The first was physical. The second was revisionist. The next morning, I checked our joint account. 3 weeks earlier, Daniel had transferred $18,000 into a separate account I didn't recognize. When I asked him about it, he said, "I didn't think you'd notice." That was the moment I understood something fundamental. I wasn't being left. I was being replaced. Quietly. Efficiently. Without apology. What Daniel didn't know was this. I had spent my entire adult life studying how narratives are built, sold, and believed. And the story he was telling about me wasn't the only one available. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I opened a new document on my laptop and began to write. Not fiction. Truth, shaped with intention. And once I started, I didn't stop. The morning after the launch, Daniel Brooks left the apartment before I woke up. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that he didn't leave a note. For years, he'd made a show of small courtesies when it suited him. Coffee set up, a casual text. Proof of consideration, without substance. This time, there was nothing. I lay in bed, listening to the radiator knock unevenly, staring at the ceiling we'd repainted together 2 summers earlier. He'd chosen the color. I'd done the work. I got up at 6:10 a.m., showered, dressed, and made coffee for 1. The apartment felt unchanged, which made the shift sharper. When you stop expecting someone to show up for you, the absence becomes factual instead of painful. At 8:03, Daniel texted, "We'll talk tonight. I'm staying late." No apology, no explanation. I replied with 1 word, "Okay." At work, no one knew what had happened the night before. I answered emails, edited grant proposals, rewrote donor messaging for an organization that paid me to give their voice clarity, while mine stayed unpublished. My supervisor, Helen Marks, complimented a campaign draft and asked if I'd be willing to take on more responsibility next quarter. "You have a way with language," she said. "People listen when you frame things." I smiled. I always did. At lunch, I checked Harborline Edition's sales dashboard. 93 copies sold overnight. Mostly local, mostly friends. 1 review had been posted. Quiet. Controlled. Unsettling. I didn't know who wrote it, but it was the first time a stranger had seen me clearly. Daniel came home at 9:27 p.m. He didn't take off his shoes. He sat at the kitchen counter and opened his laptop like the conversation was just another item on his list. "I want to be honest," he said. "I don't think we want the same things anymore." I leaned against the doorway and waited. "Vanessa Carter is someone I connect with," he continued. "She understands ambition, timing, strategy." I nodded once. "You're still figuring yourself out," he added, as if explaining a delay. "And that's okay. But I can't pause my life for it." "My life has been paused?" I asked. Daniel sighed. "You know what I mean." I did. It was the same language his mother used. The same tone Megan Brooks used when she talked about billable hours and promotion tracks. The same implication that worth was measured by visibility, not depth. "What are you asking for?" I said. "I think we should separate," Daniel replied. "Amicably. No drama." He said it like a favor. I nodded again. "Financially," he continued, "I've already spoken to someone. It makes sense to simplify. I moved some funds temporarily to avoid complications." "That was joint money," I said. "Yes," he replied, "but I earned most of it." I didn't argue. I made a note. "I'll stay with a friend for a few days," he said. "Give you space." That night, I slept on my side of the bed and didn't touch his pillow. The next morning, Patricia Brooks called. "I heard you had a little episode at the book thing," she said. Daniel was embarrassed. I didn't respond immediately. "He's under a lot of pressure," she continued. "This phase you're going through doesn't help." "This phase?" I asked. "Writing," she said gently. "It's indulgent. Men like Daniel need stability." I thanked her for calling and ended the conversation. That afternoon, I went to the public library on 5th Avenue. Not to read, to sit, to listen. I watched people, how they occupied space, who they deferred to, who they ignored. I thought about every dinner where I'd been talked over, every time my work had been introduced as a side interest, every time Daniel had corrected me in front of others and called it helpful. This wasn't sudden. It was cumulative. On Thursday, Daniel sent me a draft separation agreement. He'd already chosen a lawyer. His name was Andrew Pollock, Midtown firm, corporate background. The document was efficient, clean. It positioned Daniel as reasonable and me as dependent. Spousal support, minimal. Intellectual property, all individual works retained by creator. Joint savings, divided based on contribution percentage. He'd attached a note. This is standard. I think it's fair. I forwarded it to a friend from my MFA cohort, Lila Hernandez, who'd become an entertainment attorney in Los Angeles. She called me an hour later. This isn't fair, she said. It's tidy. That's different. I don't want to fight, I replied. I didn't say fight, Lila said. I said don't disappear. That night, I opened a new folder on my desktop. I named it plainly. Manuscript, not essays, not reflections. A novel. I didn't tell anyone. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel moved his things out in stages. He took his clothes first, then books he'd never read, then the framed photo from our wedding that his mother had chosen. I stayed consistent. Work, writing, sleep. At a family dinner for Megan's birthday, Daniel introduced Vanessa Carter as a colleague. She wore red. She sat where I used to sit. No one corrected him. Megan raised a glass. To new chapters, she said, smiling at Daniel. Patricia looked at me once. You'll land on your feet, she said. You always do. I smiled back. I didn't correct her either. What none of them noticed was this. I had stopped trying to be seen by them. I was writing something else now, something sharper. And once words leave the page, they don't belong to the people who tried to keep you small. They belong to whoever recognizes themselves in the truth. That was the shift, and it was irreversible. The first line of the novel came to me at 4:18 a.m. I remember the time because I checked the clock after writing it, as if marking evidence. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't clever. It was precise. I wrote for 90 minutes without stopping, the city still asleep, the radiator finally quiet. When I finished, I didn't reread. I closed the laptop and went to work. That became the pattern. I wrote before the world could interrupt me. I wrote without permission. Daniel Brooks stopped by the apartment 3 days later to pick up the last of his things. He didn't knock. He still had a key. You look tired, he said, scanning the room like it was already someone else's. I'm busy, I replied. He nodded as if that explained everything. He went straight to the desk in the corner where my notebooks were stacked neatly. He flipped through one absent-mindedly. Still doing this, he said. I thought maybe after the launch you'd get it out of your system. I took the notebook from his hands. Don't, I said. He raised an eyebrow. You don't have to be defensive. I didn't explain. I didn't owe him access anymore. He packed the rest of his things quickly. Before leaving, he paused at the door. Vanessa Carter and I are going to be public, he said. I didn't want you to be blindsided. I looked at him. I already was, I said. He hesitated, then smiled faintly. You'll be okay, Eleanor. You always land somewhere. Somewhere. After he left, I changed the locks. At work, Helen Marks asked if everything was all right. I said yes. It wasn't a lie. It was a boundary. At night, I wrote. The novel wasn't about Daniel. Not directly. It was about a woman whose labor was invisible until it was taken away. About a marriage that thrived on her silence. About a family that mistook compliance for love. I changed names. I changed professions. But the dynamics were exact. Every few pages, I stopped and asked myself one question. Is this honest? If the answer was no, I rewrote it. 2 weeks in, I hit 28,000 words. That was when something shifted outside my control. A literary agent named Claire Whitaker emailed me. She'd read my essays. A friend had forwarded them. She wanted to talk. We met at a cafe in Soho on a Tuesday afternoon. She was calm, direct, and didn't waste compliments. There's restraint in your writing, Claire Whitaker said. That's rare. I nodded. What are you working on now? She asked. I hesitated. Then I told her. She leaned back. Send me the first 100 pages. That night, I didn't write. I waited. Daniel's family found out about the separation through someone else. Patricia Brooks called again. "This is all happening very fast," she said. "Daniel is concerned about appearances." "I'm sure he is," I replied. "He says you're writing about him," she continued. "I'm writing," I said. "About women." "That's not appropriate," Patricia said. "Family matters should stay private." I thought about that after we hung up. Private had never protected me. On Friday, Megan Brooks posted a photo online. Daniel and Vanessa Carter at a rooftop bar. Caption: "Power couple." I didn't look twice. On Sunday night, Claire Whitaker emailed again. "This is strong, disturbingly precise. I'd like to represent it." I read the message 3 times. She suggested revisions, structural tightening, a different ending. Nothing that diluted the core. "We should move quickly," she added. "This has timing." Timing. The word Daniel loved. Over the next month, my life split cleanly into 2 tracks. Daytime Eleanor, nonprofit communications manager, dependable, polite. Nighttime Eleanor, writer, unapologetic, focused. Daniel's lawyer, Andrew Pollack, followed up about finalizing the separation. I forwarded everything to Lila Hernandez. "Don't rush," Lila said. "Let the manuscript settle first." That advice saved me later. By early spring, Claire Whitaker had secured interest from 3 publishers. One was mid-sized, one was prestige-focused, one wanted speed. We chose the second. The editor assigned was named Ruth Kaplan. She was in her 50s and didn't soften feedback. "This isn't revenge," Ruth said on our first call. "That's why it works." I revised relentlessly. I cut passages that felt indulgent. I sharpened scenes that revealed power shifts without naming them. Meanwhile, Daniel filed for divorce. He asked for mediation. He wanted things quick. At the mediation table, he spoke about fairness, about clean breaks. When it was my turn, I said very little. "I'm not in a hurry," I said. That unsettled him. Outside the room, he pulled me aside. "You don't need to do this," he said quietly, dragging it out, writing things that could be misinterpreted. "I'm not writing about you," I replied. "You just recognize yourself." His expression hardened. Vanessa Carter attended one session, waiting outside. She didn't look at me. That was fine. In May, the book sold. The advance wasn't enormous, $35,000, but it was real. More importantly, it came with a marketing plan, a title, a release date, and one condition. Ruth Kaplan wanted a public reading, a conversation, visibility. I thought of the bookstore in Brooklyn, the glass wall, the kiss. I agreed. Daniel found out through mutual acquaintances. He texted me for the first time in weeks. "We should talk before this gets out of hand." I didn't respond, because the thing he still didn't understand was this. I wasn't trying to punish him. I was reclaiming authorship. And once your story leaves your hands and enters the world, it stops being something people can control behind closed doors. The novel was almost ready. So was I. What came next would make everything visible, not just to Daniel, to everyone who had benefited from my silence and assumed it was permanent. The divorce mediation stalled the moment Daniel Brooks realized I wasn't negotiating from fear. We sat across from each other in a neutral office near Union Square. Beige walls, water glasses untouched. The mediator, a woman named Karen Holt, spoke in the careful language of balance, assets, timelines, closure. Daniel leaned back in his chair, confident again. That confidence came from familiarity. He still thought he knew how this would end. "I think we both want to move on," he said, looking at Karen, not at me. Cleanly. Karen turned to me. "Eleanor?" I folded my hands. "I'm open to moving on," I said. "I'm not open to rushing." Daniel frowned, just slightly. "There's no benefit in delaying," he said. "We don't have children. Our finances are straightforward." "They are now," I replied. Karen glanced between us. "Is there something unresolved?" "Yes," I said. "Intellectual labor." Daniel laughed, short and dismissive. "Here we go." I didn't look at him. "For 7 years," I continued, "I contributed unpaid editorial work to Daniel's professional communications. Emails, presentations, client decks. I also managed household logistics that enabled his travel and advancement." Daniel shifted in his seat. "That's marriage," he said. "You don't bill for that." "I'm not billing," I replied. I'm documenting. Karen wrote something down. After the session, Daniel followed me into the hallway. This is petty, he said quietly. You're embarrassing yourself. I looked at him then. Really looked. No, I said. I'm being precise. That night, Megan Brooks called. She didn't greet me. Daniel says you're trying to drag him through the mud, she said. I'm trying to finalize the divorce, I replied. You always do this, Megan snapped. You play the victim when things don't go your way. I stayed silent. That book, she continued, people are talking. Mom's upset. About what? I asked. That you're airing private business. Private for whom? I asked. She hung up. The next morning, Claire Whitaker forwarded me an email thread. Someone had leaked early buzz about the novel to an industry newsletter. Anonymous source. High interest. Strong voice. Marital power dynamics. The comments were already forming narratives. I didn't read them. I focused on revisions. Ruth Kaplan pushed me harder now. This chapter, she said, pulls its punch. Don't explain. Show. So I rewrote a scene where the protagonist watches her husband take credit for her work at a public event. I didn't dramatize. I let the silence do the work. When I finished, I felt the same stillness I'd felt watching Daniel kiss Vanessa. Not pain. Alignment. In June, Daniel's parents invited me to dinner. Patricia Brooks phrased it carefully. We'd like to clear the air, she said. I agreed. The dinner was held at their house in Westchester. Everything polished, familiar, controlled. Leonard Brooks spoke about the weather. Patricia asked about my job. Megan watched me like I was a legal argument she intended to dismantle. Halfway through the meal, Patricia set down her fork. This book, she said. It's unnecessary. I disagree, I replied. It's cruel, Megan added. You're humiliating Daniel. I took a sip of water. I'm writing a novel, I said. If it feels humiliating, that's worth examining. Daniel wasn't there. That was intentional. Patricia's smile tightened. You were never right for our family, she said. You lack discretion. I lacked permission, I corrected. That's different. The table went quiet. After dinner, Leonard walked me to the door. You're burning bridges, he said softly. No, I replied. I'm stepping off them. The public reading was scheduled for late July. Location: a mid-sized cultural center in Manhattan. Panel format: conversation with Ruth Kaplan. Daniel found out through LinkedIn. He texted again. Please don't do this. We can still resolve things privately. I replied with one sentence. The book is not about you. That was true. It was about power. The divorce negotiations shifted after that. Andrew Pollack sent a revised proposal. More generous. Faster. Lila Hernandez called me laughing. He's scared, she said. Not legally. Socially. I'm not targeting him, I said. I know, Lila replied. That's why it's effective. On the day of the reading, I arrived early. The room filled slowly. Strangers. Industry people. A few familiar faces. Daniel wasn't there. Vanessa Carter was. She sat in the back row, arms crossed, expression neutral. I didn't acknowledge her. When Ruth introduced me, she spoke about voice, about restraint, about what happens when women stop explaining themselves. I read an excerpt. My hands didn't shake. Afterward, the questions came. Is this autobiographical? How much of this is true? Did you worry about backlash? I answered calmly. This is a novel, I said. But emotional truth doesn't require permission. Someone asked about marriage. I paused before answering. Marriage doesn't fail because people change, I said. It fails when one person's growth depends on the other's silence. That quote made its way online within hours. By morning, the story had shifted. Daniel Brooks, senior marketing manager, was no longer the center. The book was, and with it, a narrative he couldn't control. The final mediation session was scheduled for August. Daniel arrived tense, efficient. I just want this over, he said. So do I replied. We signed the papers. The settlement reflected balance, not generosity, recognition. When it was done, Daniel stood. I never thought you'd do this, he said. I know, I replied. Outside, I checked my phone. Claire Whitaker had left a message. Foreign rights interest. 2 territories, possibly more. I smiled. Once. Because the thing Daniel feared most wasn't exposure. It was irrelevance. And that was already happening. What came next would make it permanent. The morning after the divorce papers were signed, I woke up before my alarm again. Not because of anxiety. Because my body no longer needed to brace itself for someone else's mood. I lay there for a moment, listening to the city wake up, and noticed something subtle. The tension in my jaw was gone. The familiar tightness between my shoulders had loosened. It wasn't relief. It was recalibration. At 7:12 a.m., Claire Whitaker emailed, "German rights sold. Auction in progress for UK." I stared at the screen longer than necessary, not because I was surprised, because this was the first time good news arrived without being immediately diminished by someone else's reaction. I forwarded the email to Ruth Kaplan. Her reply came back within minutes. "Good. Keep writing. Don't read comments." I followed that advice religiously. The book was scheduled for release in October. Advance copies had already gone out. The industry buzz was no longer quiet. It wasn't loud either. It was worse. It was steady. Daniel Brooks tried to regain control through familiarity. He sent an email that week. Not about the divorce. Not about logistics. About memory. "I was thinking about that trip we took to Montreal. You used to laugh more then." I deleted it. Nostalgia is a common tactic when authority slips. Vanessa Carter, on the other hand, chose visibility. She posted a photo on social media of herself and Daniel at a charity gala. The caption was careful, grateful for new beginnings. Within hours, the comments filled with coded questions. "Isn't that the guy from the book everyone's talking about? Awkward timing. Hope she's okay." She deleted the post by morning. At work, Helen Marks called me into her office. "We've been approached," she said, "by a media outlet." I waited. "They want to interview you. About the book, but also about your work here. Ethics, language, power." I considered it. "Only if it stays focused on the writing," I said. Helen nodded. That's what I told them. The interview ran 2 weeks later. No photos of my apartment. No questions about Daniel. The headline read, "When Women Stop Explaining." That phrase followed me. At a publishing meeting in early September, Ruth Kaplan walked me through the marketing strategy. "We're not positioning this as a divorce book," she said. "It's about authorship." "Good," I replied. "Your restraint is the hook," she continued. "People expect anger. They get clarity instead." Daniel's sister, Megan Brooks, sent a message the same day. "This has gone too far. You're enjoying humiliating him." I replied once. "I'm enjoying not being silent." She didn't respond. 2 days later, Megan removed Daniel's last name from her professional bio. Quietly, efficiently. That was the first crack in the family narrative. The second came from Patricia Brooks. She left a voicemail. "I didn't raise my son to be a villain," she said. "But I suppose I raised him to believe he was always right." She didn't apologize. She didn't need to. That admission did more damage than denial ever could. As the release date approached, invitations arrived. Panels, podcasts, essays. I accepted, selectively. I didn't talk about my marriage unless asked directly. When I was asked, I answered without metaphor. "I wasn't abused," I said once. "I was erased." That distinction resonated. The first major review dropped on October 3rd. The New York Review of Books didn't mention Daniel. It didn't mention betrayal. It called the novel a study in quiet power dynamics and delayed recognition. Ruth Kaplan forwarded it with one line. "This is the one people will quote." Daniel texted that night, "This isn't what you think it is." I blocked the number. The launch event for the novel was held in Manhattan, at a venue 3 times the size of the Brooklyn bookstore. There was no glass wall, no cheap wine, no folding chairs. There were cameras. I arrived alone. Claire Whitaker met me at the door. "Whatever happens tonight," she said, "remember this. You didn't take anything from anyone. You claimed your work." Inside, the room filled quickly. I spotted Vanessa Carter near the back again. This time, she left before the reading started. Daniel wasn't there, but his absence was felt. After the reading, someone asked the question everyone had been circling. "Do you think writing this book cost you your marriage?" I didn't answer immediately. Then I said, "No. The marriage cost me years of authorship. Writing gave them back." That quote spread faster than the first. The following week, Daniel's firm quietly reassigned him to an internal role. No announcement, no explanation. Vanessa Carter updated her LinkedIn headline. She removed his name from the company description. Distance is contagious when reputation becomes unstable. By mid-October, the book was on its third printing. Foreign rights continued to sell. I received my first royalty statement. It wasn't life-changing, but it was validating in a way no apology could be. One evening, after a long day of interviews, I sat alone in my apartment and opened the original folder labeled manuscript. I scrolled to the first page. The first line still held. That mattered. I thought about the woman I had been at the Brooklyn bookstore. The way I'd watched someone else define my place in the room. That woman hadn't disappeared. She'd just stopped asking for permission. The revenge wasn't loud. It didn't require confrontation or cruelty. It was structural. It was success that made erasure impossible. And the story wasn't finished yet. Because when power shifts quietly, the final reckoning doesn't come from the person who was wronged. It comes from the world adjusting around them. That adjustment had already begun, and it was about to reach the people who thought they'd been immune. Success changes the temperature of a room before it changes the people inside it. By late October, I could feel it everywhere. In emails that opened with warmer language. In invitations that arrived without explanation. In the way people listened without interrupting. None of it felt intoxicating. It felt instructional. I learned quickly that visibility doesn't just elevate you. It reorders everyone who once assumed you would stay in place. Daniel Brooks felt that shift before I did. I know because his firm reached out to my publisher. Not officially. Not directly. A junior communications director named Ethan Rowe emailed Harborline's publicity department requesting clarification. There were concerns, he wrote, about reputational overlap between the novel and a senior employee's personal life. Ruth Kaplan forwarded the email to me with one line, "They're panicking." I didn't respond. Neither did she. The novel didn't mention Daniel by name. It didn't mention marketing. It didn't mention New York. But power doesn't require accuracy to feel threatened. It only needs proximity. On November 2nd, I was invited to speak at a writers' forum at Columbia. Panel format. Topic: narrative ownership. The irony wasn't subtle. I accepted. 2 days before the event, Megan Brooks emailed me, not angry, calculated. "Mom wants to know if you're going to keep doing this." I stared at the sentence for a long time. Doing what? Writing? Existing? Refusing to shrink? I replied with one line, "I'm not doing anything to anyone." She didn't respond. At the forum, the audience was engaged, curious, not hostile. Someone asked me if I worried about legal consequences. "No," I said. "I worried about artistic ones." Another asked if my family had read the book. "I assume so," I replied. "I don't manage their reactions." That answer traveled. A week later, Patricia Brooks called again. Her voice was different now, less authoritative, more cautious. "I don't recognize our family in this portrayal," she said. "I didn't portray your family," I replied. "But people think." "People think many things," I said. "I'm not responsible for their projections." She paused. "You've changed," she said. "Yes," I replied. She didn't argue. That silence felt heavier than any accusation. At work, Helen Marks asked if I'd consider taking a leave of absence. "Temporarily," she said. "You're in demand. We want to support you." I considered it carefully. "No," I said. "I don't want my writing framed as an escape." She smiled. "That's exactly why I asked." The book hit a tipping point in mid-November. It appeared on a bestseller list. Not the top one, but a visible one. Enough to make the conversation unavoidable. Daniel's firm issued an internal memo about personal conduct and media association. Generic language, poorly timed. Someone leaked it. The leak wasn't traced to me. It didn't need to be. By Thanksgiving, Daniel had taken a leave of absence. Vanessa Carter removed all photos of him from her social media. Quietly, without comment. Distance again. It always came when visibility became uncomfortable. I spent Thanksgiving alone, by choice. I cooked for myself. I read. I didn't perform gratitude for people who confused it with compliance. That night, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. It was Daniel, not a text, not a voicemail, an email. Long, careful, defensive. He wrote about misunderstanding, about pressure, about how he never intended to diminish me. He wrote that he felt betrayed. That line stood out. I didn't reply. The next morning, Claire Whitaker called. "We've got a film inquiry," she said. I laughed once. Not because it was funny, because it was surreal. "No commitment," she added. "Just interest." "Let it sit," I said. Everything didn't need to happen at once. December brought another shift. An essay I'd written years earlier was rediscovered and republished by a major outlet. It framed the novel not as an event, but as part of a larger body of work. That mattered. It removed the narrative of reaction. I wasn't responding to betrayal. I was building a career. At a holiday party hosted by the publisher, I ran into someone unexpected. Leonard Brooks, Daniel's father, stood near the bar, holding a drink he hadn't touched. He looked older than I remembered. "I didn't come to confront you," he said quietly. "I assumed," I replied. "You were right about one thing," he continued. "Silence isn't virtue." I nodded. He hesitated. "Daniel thought he was entitled to the space you made." "That's common," I said. "It's also incorrect." Leonard nodded slowly. "I won't ask you to soften anything," he said. "I just wanted you to know. I see it now." That was as close as the family came to acknowledgement. It was enough. By the end of the year, the novel had done what it needed to do. It didn't destroy Daniel. It didn't redeem him, either. It repositioned me. And that repositioning created consequences he couldn't negotiate. The final shift came quietly. An invitation arrived in early January. A literary residency. 6 months. Fully funded. Space. Time. Autonomy. I accepted without hesitation. When I packed my apartment, I found the wedding photo Daniel had left behind. I didn't tear it up. I didn't keep it either. I placed it in a box labeled Archive. Not because it defined me, because it no longer did. As I locked the door behind me, I understood something with clarity. Revenge doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's the simple act of moving forward, while the people who underestimated you stay frozen in the moment they thought you were small. And that kind of revenge lasts, because it isn't fueled by anger. It's fueled by authorship. And I had finally claimed mine. The residency was in northern Vermont, tucked between a river and a line of trees that muted the sound of the road. The house was old but deliberate. Thick floors, wide windows, a desk positioned to face nothing but water and sky. For the first week, I didn't write. That surprised me. I walked. I cooked simple meals. I slept without setting an alarm. I let my nervous system learn a different tempo. The other residents arrived slowly. A poet named Samuel Reed from Portland. A playwright, June Ellis from Oakland. A nonfiction writer, Thomas Klein, who spoke very little and listened too much. We introduced ourselves without resumes. That was the rule. On the 8th day, I sat down at the desk and opened a new document. This one wasn't a novel. It was an essay. I wrote about invisibility. Not metaphorically, practically. About how women's labor is often described as support until it becomes leverage. About how silence is rewarded until it isn't. I didn't send it to anyone. I let it exist. Back in New York, the world continued adjusting without me. Claire Whitaker sent occasional updates. Foreign editions moving into production. Audio rights negotiations. Interest from a major streaming platform that wanted a female-driven psychological narrative. I told her I wasn't in a hurry. For the first time, that wasn't a strategy. It was a choice. Daniel Brooks tried again, this time through a mutual acquaintance. A former classmate from graduate school named Aaron Levin. "He's not doing well," Aaron said over the phone. "He feels like everything was taken from him." I listened. "Did he ever say that about me?" I asked. Aaron paused. "No, that's the difference," I replied. Aaron didn't argue. In early February, a journalist named Rebecca Moore requested an interview. Long form. Not about the book specifically. About marriage, ambition, and narrative control. I agreed under one condition. No personal questions that weren't anchored in work. She accepted. The interview ran in March. It didn't go viral. It went deep. Rebecca Moore didn't frame me as wronged. She framed me as deliberate. That mattered. Daniel's firm announced his resignation 2 weeks later. The statement was brief. Mutual decision. New opportunities. Vanessa Carter was not mentioned. Neither was the book. but the timing was noted. Megan Brooks sent me a message that same afternoon. He's leaving New York. I didn't ask where. I didn't ask why. I didn't respond. At the residency, June Ellis asked me one night why I never spoke about anger. I feel it, I said. I just don't lead with it. She nodded. That's scarier. In April, I received my first royalty check that reflected real momentum. Not symbolic, not modest. Enough to shift my sense of scale. I didn't celebrate. I paid off debt. I updated savings. I made the math quiet. The residency ended in late May. Before I left, Samuel Reed asked if I wanted to collaborate on a reading series. I want voices that don't explain themselves, he said. I agreed. When I returned to New York, the city felt different, not smaller. Less demanding. I moved apartments. Not for distance, for light. The new place had windows that faced east. I wrote in the mornings now, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. At a panel in June, someone asked me directly if I felt any satisfaction watching my ex-husband's life unravel. I answered without pause. I don't track his life, I said. I track my work. The room went quiet. That answer followed me longer than any quote. In July, Patricia Brooks passed away, a heart condition. Sudden. Daniel reached out through Claire Whitaker, asking if I would attend the service. I considered it. Then, I declined. Grief doesn't reopen doors that were closed with intention. The funeral was private, family only. Leonard Brooks sent a handwritten note afterward. She regretted many things. I think she knew she misjudged you. I placed the note in the archive box with the wedding photo, not as evidence, as history. That summer, the streaming inquiry became a formal option. They wanted to adapt the novel. They wanted my involvement. They wanted changes. I declined the first offer. I negotiated the second. I walked away from the third. When the fourth came, it respected authorship. I signed. Daniel Brooks was not consulted. That mattered more than money. In September, I began teaching a workshop at a community arts center, not because I needed the income, because I wanted proximity. The students were women, mostly. Late 20s, early 40s, some married, some not, all of them careful. On the first day, I said one thing. You don't owe clarity to people who benefit from your confusion. No one asked what I meant. They knew. That fall, my second book proposal sold. Not on concept, on trust. By then, Daniel had moved west. Someone mentioned San Diego. Someone else said Austin. It didn't matter. He stopped being part of my mental geography. One evening, as I organized notes for the new project, I came across the separation agreement. The language felt distant, legal, finished. I didn't reread it. I recycled it. Because closure doesn't come from revisiting contracts. It comes from not needing them anymore. The arc I hadn't anticipated was this. The revenge wasn't in watching Daniel lose ground. It was in discovering how little of my energy his loss required. I wasn't healed because he suffered. I was healed because I stopped orienting myself around his perception. That was the quietest victory. And the most permanent. The next chapter of my life wasn't about reaction. It was about construction. And that meant there was one final confrontation left. Not with him. With the version of myself that once believed silence was safety. That reckoning was approaching. And I was ready for it. The confrontation didn't happen in a room with raised voices. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, in a place I'd avoided for years, because I told myself it didn't matter. My old graduate school. I'd been invited to give a guest lecture to an MFA seminar, not as an alumna, as a working writer. That distinction mattered. The building hadn't changed. Same narrow hallways, same bulletin board crowded with flyers promising visibility. Same quiet anxiety humming beneath ambition. I arrived early and waited in the faculty lounge, sipping coffee that tasted exactly like it had a decade ago. That familiarity stirred something I hadn't expected. This was where I learned to be patient. This was where I learned to listen more than I spoke. This was where I learned to accept being underestimated as the price of access. The seminar instructor was named Professor Alan Whitmore. Late 60s, respected. He taught one of my workshops back when my name meant nothing outside the classroom. "Eleanor Brooks," he said, shaking my hand. "You've done well." I smiled. "I've been consistent." He nodded, as if that explained more than success ever could. The students filtered in. 12 of them. all watching me with careful interest. They'd read my novel. They'd read interviews. They were trying to locate me. I didn't help them. I started by reading a short passage. Not from the novel, from an essay I hadn't published yet. It described a woman editing her husband's emails at midnight while he slept, convinced that making him sound better was part of loving him. No one interrupted. When I finished, I looked up. "What do you think the danger is?" I asked, in confusing usefulness with worth. The room stayed quiet. Then a woman in the second row spoke. "You disappear," she said, "and people don't notice until you stop." I nodded. Exactly. After the lecture, a few students stayed behind. Questions about craft, about agents, about navigating relationships while writing. One of them asked carefully, "How did you know when to stop compromising?" I considered that. When compromise started costing me authorship, I said, not just of my work, of my life. That answer followed me out of the building. Outside, I stood on the steps longer than necessary. I thought about the version of myself who'd once sat in those classrooms, convinced that talent needed permission, that ambition required apology, that being agreeable was a survival strategy. That was the version I needed to confront, not with anger, with acknowledgement. That evening, I went home and opened a notebook I'd kept since my 20s. Old drafts, half-finished stories, margin notes written to myself in a smaller hand. Don't be too harsh. Tone it down. Maybe cut this. I read through them slowly. Then I took a pen and crossed out every one of those notes. I wrote one sentence on the last page. Clarity is not cruelty. The next day, the past tried one more time to assert itself. An email arrived from Andrew Pollock, Daniel's former lawyer. Subject line, inquiry. The message was brief. Daniel was struggling to finalize certain financial matters tied to the divorce settlement. There was confusion about an account adjustment. He wanted to know if I'd be willing to clarify. I forwarded the email to Lila Hernandez. Her reply came back fast. "You're not obligated to manage his aftermath." I agreed. I didn't respond. That silence was different from the old ones. It wasn't defensive. It was final. Later that week, I attended a literary fundraiser in Manhattan. Quiet. Small. Not performative. I was speaking with an editor when I felt a presence beside me. Vanessa Carter. She looked tired. Not dramatic, just worn down by proximity to something that had outlived its usefulness. "I won't keep you," she said quickly. "I just wanted to say something." I waited. "I didn't know," she said. "Not at first. About how he talked about you. About what he took for granted." I didn't respond. "I thought ambition looked like confidence," she continued. "I didn't realize how much of it was built on extraction." She swallowed. "I left," she said. "Not because of the book, because of what it made me see." I met her eyes. "That's yours to carry," I said. "Not mine." She nodded. "I know." Then she walked away. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt distance. That was better. In October, I began outlining my next novel. Not about marriage, not about betrayal. About voice. About a woman who refuses to be translated for others. The work came easily. That scared me at first. Then I understood. Ease doesn't mean superficial. It means alignment. At a dinner with friends later that month, someone asked me if I believed in karma. I considered the question. "I believe in consequences," I said. Karma implies intention from the universe. Consequences just require patterns. Patterns don't care about fairness. They care about repetition. By November, the adaptation deal moved into development. Meetings, notes, conversations about casting. I insisted on one clause, creative veto. It wasn't about control. It was about protection. At Thanksgiving, I received a message from my mother. Not Daniel's mother, mine. She'd been quiet through all of this, supportive but distant, careful not to interfere. She wrote, "I'm proud of how you stood your ground." I wrote back, "Thank you for letting me." That exchange mattered more than anything Daniel's family had said, because this reckoning wasn't just external, it was internal. It was the final severing of the belief that being chosen by someone else determined my value. The woman I used to be had survived by staying quiet. The woman I was becoming survived by being exact. And once that shift happens, There's no returning to who you were before. The final chapter wouldn't be about him or them. It would be about what remains when you stop narrating yourself through other people's expectations. That ending was already taking shape, and it was mine. The first time I understood that my life no longer orbited around the past was when I missed a message and didn't feel compelled to explain. It happened on an ordinary morning in early December. I was halfway through drafting a scene when my phone buzzed somewhere across the room. I saw the notification later. A missed call from an unfamiliar number. No voicemail, no follow-up. Months earlier, I would have wondered who it was, what they wanted, whether I'd failed some invisible obligation. This time, I went back to the sentence I was shaping and didn't break its rhythm. That was new. The adaptation meetings began to feel real after the holidays. Not glamorous, methodical. Conference rooms, legal language, people who spoke in conditional verbs. The production company assigned a development executive named Rachel Kim, mid-40s, sharp-eyed, direct. "I'm interested in restraint," Rachel Kim said on our first call. "That's what makes this dangerous." I liked her immediately. She didn't ask about Daniel. She asked about voice, about what I wouldn't compromise. "I won't make her louder," I said. "She doesn't need to be." Rachel nodded. "Good. Audiences underestimate quiet women. Then they blame them for the surprise." That sentence stayed with me. At the same time, the legal remnants of my marriage began to unravel in small, predictable ways. Final bank transfers, paperwork corrections, administrative friction. Andrew Pollock reached out again through Lila Hernandez. Daniel was disputing a minor valuation detail, a few $1,000s. Symbolic more than material. "Do you want me to push back?" Lila asked. "No," I said. "Let it go through the process." "What if he drags it out?" "Then he'll drag it out," I replied. "I won't." That choice saved me weeks of emotional energy. In January, the paperback edition of the novel was announced. The cover was different, bolder, less explanatory. Ruth Kaplan sent me a mock-up. "This one doesn't apologize," she wrote. Neither did I. The book club circuit followed. Libraries, community centers, small groups of women who spoke with an intensity that surprised me. Not admiration, recognition. One woman in her 50s said, "I didn't know I was allowed to be angry without being loud." Another said, "I left a marriage 10 years ago and never named why. This did it." I didn't absorb their stories as responsibility. I let them exist alongside mine. That distinction mattered. In February, my mother visited me for the first time since the divorce was finalized. She sat at my kitchen table, looking around the apartment with curiosity, not judgment. "You seem settled," she said. "I am," I replied. She hesitated. "I worried when you stopped calling so much." "I didn't stop loving you," I said. "I stopped managing everyone." She nodded slowly. "I think I understand." That was enough. Around the same time, an unexpected invitation arrived. Daniel's firm, the one he'd resigned from, announced a public ethics panel. Topic: corporate narratives and personal accountability. Someone had suggested my name. Rachel Kim forwarded the invitation to me with a single line: "Your absence might speak louder than your presence." I declined. Not out of spite, out of clarity. I didn't need to appear in rooms built around him to validate my work. March brought the first real moment of reckoning, not with Daniel, with myself. I received an offer to write a regular column. Good money, high visibility, tight deadlines, clear expectations. It was flattering. It was also misaligned. The contract framed my voice as reactive. Commentary, response. I declined. The younger version of me would have accepted out of fear, of missing momentum, of appearing difficult. The current version understood something else. Momentum doesn't disappear when you choose direction. It sharpens. That spring, Daniel resurfaced indirectly one last time. A mutual friend mentioned he'd read the novel. He said it felt like watching himself through glass, the friend told me. I didn't ask for more. I didn't need to know his interpretation. Understanding after consequence doesn't reverse anything. By April, the development process slowed. That was expected. Scripts take time. Negotiations stall. I didn't fill the space with anxiety. I filled it with work. I finished the first draft of my second novel on April 22nd. Earlier than planned. cleaner than expected. Claire Whitaker read it in 3 days. "This is not a follow-up," she said on the phone. "It's a declaration." That was exactly what I wanted. At the end of the month, I ran into Leonard Brooks again. This time on the street, by accident. He looked thinner, older. He hesitated when he saw me. "I won't keep you," he said quickly. "I'm not rushed," I replied. He nodded. "Daniel talks about you differently now." I waited. "He says you taught him something," Leonard continued. "About underestimating people." I met his eyes. "Learning doesn't always come with repair," I said. He nodded again. "I know." We parted without ceremony. That interaction didn't haunt me. It didn't gratify me either. It simply confirmed what I already knew. The story had closed. In May, the paperback released. Sales were steady, strong, sustained. The industry moved on to the next thing, as it always does. I didn't chase it. I had my own pace now. One evening, as I was reviewing notes for a new project, I found an old email draft saved in my archives. Unsent. A message I'd written years ago to Daniel and never sent. It explained. It justified. It apologized. I read it once. Then I deleted it. Not because it was wrong. Because it was no longer relevant. The woman who wrote that email believed clarity required consensus. The woman reading it understood that clarity only requires truth. The final phase of this story wasn't dramatic. There was no confrontation, no confession, no redemption arc. There was just the slow, irreversible shift of authority. From external validation to internal alignment. From being written about to writing. And once that transfer happens, nothing can undo it. The last chapter wouldn't close with noise. It would close with a boundary so stable it didn't need defense. That boundary was already in place, and I was living inside it. The power shift became obvious the day no one asked me to explain myself. It happened at a roundtable discussion hosted by a National Arts Foundation in early June. 10 writers, 2 moderators, an audience that listened more than it spoke. I was introduced without qualifiers, not emerging, not recently divorced, not controversial, just a writer. That mattered. During the discussion, a moderator asked about responsibility, about whether writers owe empathy to the people who recognize themselves in our work. I answered carefully. "I don't owe empathy to power," I said. "I owe precision to truth." No one challenged it. Afterward, a woman approached me. She introduced herself as Diane Feldman, a senior editor at a publishing house I'd once submitted to and been quietly rejected by. "We passed on your early work," she said. "I wanted to tell you that was a mistake." I nodded. "We didn't know how to place your voice then," she added. "I didn't either," I replied. That was the point. The summer unfolded without urgency. The adaptation entered a holding phase. Scripts circulated. Notes returned. Nothing demanded my reaction. That space felt intentional. I filled it by teaching, writing, and saying no more often than yes. The invitations kept coming. Panels, think pieces, appearances framed as commentary on betrayal, marriage, or ambition. I declined anything that tried to narrow me. My agent supported every decision. "You're not building a moment," Claire Whitaker reminded me. "You're building a body of work." Daniel Brooks crossed my path one final time in July, not in person, through paperwork. A notification arrived from Lila Hernandez. Daniel was requesting a minor modification to the settlement. He wanted to adjust the language around intellectual credit related to a campaign I'd helped edit years earlier. "Do you want to contest it?" Lila asked. I read the request once. "No," I said. "Let it stand as written." "That benefits him," she said carefully. "It doesn't cost me," I replied. That distinction mattered. Letting go without loss is not generosity. It's clarity. In August, I traveled alone for the first time in years. Not for work, for myself. I rented a small house near the coast in Maine. No schedule, no audience. I woke early. I wrote longhand. I walked until my thoughts quieted. One afternoon, I found myself rereading the first chapter of the novel. I noticed something I hadn't before. The protagonist doesn't ask for justice. She creates distance. That was the truest part. Back in New York, the industry conversation shifted again. Someone else's book. Someone else's story. I didn't chase relevance. I trusted momentum. In September, I signed the contract for my second novel. The terms were better. The expectations clearer. the respect implicit. No one asked me to soften anything. That felt like the real win. Around the same time, my mother came to one of my readings. She sat in the back. She didn't interrupt. Afterward, she hugged me and said, "You seem certain." "I am," I replied. She smiled. "I wish I'd learned that earlier." We didn't unpack that. We didn't need to. Certainty doesn't ask for processing. It asks for maintenance. Daniel, I heard, had started consulting independently. A reset, a rebrand. Someone mentioned he spoke about growth now, about lessons. I didn't correct the narrative. People can frame their past however they need to survive it. That doesn't obligate me to participate. The final adjustment came quietly. I stopped introducing myself with context. No explanations. No qualifiers. Just my name. Just my work. And in doing so, I noticed something else. The anger I'd once thought necessary had dissolved completely, not because it was suppressed, because it had done its job. Anger had alerted me to imbalance. Action had corrected it. What remained was steadiness. Authority without volume. Self-respect without performance. The last chapter wouldn't be about triumph. It would be about what happens after you stop waiting for validation to arrive from the people who taught you to doubt yourself. That moment had already passed. All that was left was to live inside the outcome. And that outcome was mine to define. The last illusion to fall wasn't about love or betrayal. It was about safety. I realized that one morning in October, while reviewing notes for a talk I was scheduled to give at a women's leadership conference in Boston. The topic was supposed to be narrative agency. The organizer, a woman named Karen Doyle, had asked if I wanted to frame it around resilience. I declined. "I want to talk about risk," I told her. "Specifically, the risk of staying." She paused, then agreed. That distinction mattered more than anything else I'd said publicly. For years, I had believed that silence kept me safe, that compliance minimized damage, that being agreeable reduced fallout. None of that had been true. It had only delayed consequence and redirected it inward. The talk went well. Not loudly, not emotionally. Women listened, took notes, nodded at places that told me they recognized themselves. Afterward, a woman approached me. Early 40s, wedding ring, corporate posture. "I thought staying quiet was maturity," she said. "Now I see it was fear." I didn't correct her. Fear and maturity are often confused in environments that reward endurance. On the train back to New York, I thought about the version of myself who had mistaken patience for virtue and tolerance for love. I didn't judge her. She had been doing the best she could with the information she had, but she wasn't someone I could live as anymore. That same week, the adaptation entered its final contractual phase. The production company sent over a revised agreement. Budget numbers, timelines, control clauses. I read every line. When I sent back my notes, there were fewer than expected. Not because I didn't care, because I knew where my line was now. Rachel Kim called me that evening. "You're very clear," she said. "That makes this easy." Clarity has a way of doing that. Around that time, Daniel Brooks tried one final maneuver. Not contact, not apology. Narrative. A mutual acquaintance forwarded me a podcast episode Daniel had appeared on. Not by name, not directly. He spoke about reinvention, about learning to listen, about being humbled by change. He never mentioned me. He didn't have to. The subtext was obvious. I listened to the first 10 minutes, then I turned it off. People rewrite their past when the original version stops serving them. That's human. It's also irrelevant, because the truth doesn't need maintenance once it's lived. In November, I hosted a small dinner in my apartment. Not a celebration, just a gathering. Claire Whitaker came. So did Ruth Kaplan. A few writers, a neighbor. No one talked about the book much. We talked about work, about money, about rest. That was new too. At the end of the night, Ruth lingered by the door. "You know," she said, "most people think revenge has to look like destruction." I smiled faintly. "Most people confuse revenge with attention." She nodded. "What you did was harder." "I just stopped consenting," I said. She laughed quietly. "That's usually enough." Later that month, I received an email from Harbor Line Editions. The novel had been assigned to a university syllabus. Contemporary literature, power, and voice. I sat with that longer than I expected. Not because of pride, because that meant the work would outlive the circumstances that created it. That was the real reversal. The story was no longer about what I endured. It was about what I built. Thanksgiving came and went. I spent it with friends. No explanations. No traditions that required endurance. My mother joined us. She watched more than she spoke. At one point, she pulled me aside. "I see now how much you carried," she said quietly. I nodded. "I wish I'd intervened earlier," she added. "I don't," I replied. I needed to see it clearly. She didn't argue. In December, I finalized the outline for my third project. Not fiction this time. Essays. Precise. Unsentimental. I didn't rush it. Urgency had lost its power over me. One afternoon, while cleaning out a drawer, I found the spare key Daniel had once insisted we keep, with a neighbor, just in case. I held it for a moment. Then I dropped it in the trash. Not ceremonially, functionally. That key didn't open anything anymore. The last thing to resolve wasn't with Daniel, or his family, or the industry. It was with the version of myself that still flinched when asserting boundaries. That flinch hadn't disappeared completely, but it no longer controlled me. The final clarity came on an ordinary evening. I was sitting at my desk, editing a paragraph, when I noticed something I hadn't felt in years. Ease, not comfort. Not happiness. Ease. The absence of internal negotiation. That was the aftermath no one talks about. After the betrayal, after the work, after the so-called revenge, you don't feel victorious. You feel aligned. And alignment is quiet. The last chapter wouldn't be about closure. It would be about the choice I now made every day without thinking. To write, to speak, to live, without shrinking. To keep anyone else comfortable. That was the ending. Everything else was just proof. I didn't wake up one morning feeling finished. There was no clean line between before and after. No moment where the past stopped casting a shadow and the future fully arrived. What changed was simpler. I stopped rehearsing myself. I noticed it one evening in January while answering an email from a young writer asking for advice. Halfway through typing, I realized I wasn't choosing my words carefully. I wasn't cushioning them. I wasn't trying to be kind at my own expense. I was just being accurate. That was new. Accuracy used to feel dangerous. Now it felt neutral. By then, the adaptation was officially in pre-production. Scripts locked, casting underway, my role clearly defined. I attended meetings when necessary and declined when not. No one questioned it. That was the benefit of consistency. People stop pushing when they realize the boundary isn't negotiable. Daniel Brooks disappeared entirely from my daily awareness. Not as an effort, as a consequence. Occasionally, someone mentioned him in passing. Consulting, relocation, reinvention. I nodded politely and moved on. Revenge implies fixation. I felt none. What I felt instead was capacity. Time to think. Time to choose. Time to rest without guilt. In February, I received an invitation to speak at a national writers' conference. Keynote: the opening night. I almost declined out of habit. Then I caught myself. That habit belonged to an older version of me. I accepted. The speech wasn't dramatic. It wasn't personal. It was precise. I talked about authorship as responsibility, about the danger of letting other people define your narrative simply because they speak louder, about how silence is often mistaken for depth when it's actually compliance. I ended with one sentence. If telling the truth costs you your seat at the table, build a different table. The room stood. I didn't feel powerful. I felt grounded. That distinction mattered. Later that night, a woman approached me. Mid-30s. Wedding ring absent, but recently removed, judging by the pale mark on her hand. I thought revenge meant ruining him, she said quietly. But you didn't. No, I replied. I ruined the version of myself that needed his approval. She nodded slowly. That's worse. Yes, I said. For them. Spring came without urgency. The second novel entered revisions. The essay collection took shape. I worked steadily, not obsessively. I stopped measuring my days by output and started measuring them by alignment. That metric was unforgiving in the best way. In April, my mother visited again. We walked through a park near my apartment, neither of us rushing to fill the space. "You seem lighter," she said. "I'm not carrying things that aren't mine anymore," I replied. She smiled. "I'm trying to learn that." "It takes time," I said. "And repetition." She nodded, thoughtful. That summer, I traveled again. Not for escape, for perspective. I wrote in unfamiliar places. Cafes where no one knew my name. Libraries where the only currency was silence. The work deepened, not because of pain, because of clarity. One afternoon, while editing a paragraph, I realized something that would have terrified me years earlier. I no longer needed this story. Not because it wasn't important, because it had already done its work. The betrayal had initiated movement. The writing had structured it. The aftermath had stabilized it. There was nothing left to extract. That was the moment I understood what real revenge looks like. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't linger. It leaves you free. In August, the adaptation wrapped its first phase. Casting announcements were made. Press buzz followed. My name appeared in articles without explanation, just attribution. That mattered more than praise. At a small gathering later that month, a friend asked me if I ever missed the life I thought I'd have. I considered the question carefully. "I missed the certainty," I said, "not the structure." Certainty is comforting. Structure can be rebuilt. The woman I used to be wanted reassurance before she acted. The woman I am now acts and lets reassurance follow, or not. That's the difference between surviving and choosing. The final lesson wasn't about marriage or betrayal or success. It was about authorship in the quiet moments. The emails you don't send. The apologies you stop drafting. The boundaries you maintain without explanation. Those are the places where lives actually change. I didn't win because Daniel lost. I won because I stopped orienting myself around his perception. I didn't reclaim my voice by shouting. I reclaimed it by using it consistently. That's what lasts. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in any part of it, especially the parts where silence felt safer than truth, know this: you don't need permission to be exact. You don't need consensus to choose yourself. And you don't need revenge that looks dramatic to reclaim your power. Sometimes the most permanent payback is living well, visibly, and without apology. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment and share what part stayed with you. Like this video if you've ever been underestimated. And subscribe if you want more real family drama and quiet revenge stories where the tables don't flip loudly, they turn slowly, and stay that way.